Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our alumni webinar series. I'm Dr. Liz Flanagan. I'm lecturer in creative writing and creative industries in the School of Humanities. I teach mainly on the publishing MA and I draw on my experience as a children's author and also my former career as a book editor. So I've been asked to host this webinar as part of the YSJU Alumni Series, Alumni Journeys, Creativity, Careers and Community. So before I introduce today's speaker, there's just a couple of housekeeping matters. So we will be doing a Q&A at the end of the talk and the questions have been prepared in advance. But if you have any questions you'd like to ask the speaker, please do email, and the address is alumni@yorksj.ac.uk and the team will pass on your questions. And there's also an auto transcript appearing during the talk for increased accessibility, but please be aware that it might not translate perfectly. So thank you. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jenna Houston. So Jenna studied English literature at York St John and she graduated in 2018. She went on to study at the University of Sheffield for an MA in English literature part-time, completing her studies in 2020 and graduating in 22. So since then, she's gone on to forge a career in publishing, currently working as marketing executive for award-winning independent publishing company Boldwood Books, where she runs campaigns for commercial fiction titles, ranging from romantic comedies to psychological thrillers, some of my favourites in there. Never straying too far from her bookish roots as a student, you can usually find her reading all kinds of books in her spare time. So I'd now like to pass over to Jenna, and I look forward to chatting again at the end. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. So honestly, I really look back at my time at York St John really fondly. I started York St John in 2015 as a young 18-year-old, super excited and wide-eyed and ready to sort of study my English literature degree. And like I say, I loved every moment. I really believe that experience sort of helped to shape me in the best possible way. I was really shy first year. I lacked a lot of confidence, but by my third year, I had sort of really taken it all in my stride and loved university life more than anything else that I'd done before. I took a really wide range of modules, all of which I feel like sort of set me up for my career in publishing in lots of ways. Favourites being sort of 19th century writing and 20th century writing and American literature, all of these things that sort of really helped to shape me into the researcher and, person and reader that I am now. In my third year, I also started writing for the York St John literature blog, which was a relatively new thing and something that sort of took a lot for me to step out of my comfort zone and do. But I worked sort of alongside other students in my year and some of the lecturers to write pieces for the blog. And we sort of attended wider university literature events and sort of writing them up for the blog. And I really loved being part of that as a writer. And I eventually went on and became sort of sub-editor of this, working with two other girls on my course. And we absolutely loved it. We sort of coordinated content alongside lecturers that helped to edit the blog. We assigned writers to events, doing our own write-ups as well. And it was sort of my first introduction into writing in a more professional, non-academic context. It was something that really sort of shaped my future career prospects, and plus it was something that I could add to my CV as well, which until that moment I hadn't really done a huge amount that sort of would help me forge a career after university. And I think I became quite aware of that towards my third year and really wanted to sort of put myself out there a little bit more. And, third year, obviously, it rolls around and then you've got your dissertation writing, which obviously, seems like a really daunting task before you do it. And mine was focused on Gothic spaces in like 19th century. I think it was titled something like Transgression and Gothic Space, something like really fancy and academic at the time, and all about sort of facade and duality and that kind of thing. And I looked at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Wuthering Heights and I forget the other text now, it was that long ago, but I worked with my supervisor, Dr. Jo War, and she was fantastic, and we sort of conducted that research. And you know, after York St John, I then knew that I just needed to carry on doing something that would allow me to sort of explore those reading passions. So I decided to go on and do a master's degree at the University of Sheffield. I think if I could have stayed at York St John for my master's degree, I probably would have. But at the time, their only MA in literature was a contemporary pathway. And like I say, at the time, I was really keen on studying the 19th century. So I settled on the University of Sheffield's general MA in English literature, which allowed me to choose modules from a really wide catalogue of courses. I also chose to study part-time, something that I don't really see many MA students opting to do now, but I think it allowed me to work part-time as well. At the time I was sort of working in like a little cafe, and I wanted to keep that up, and I couldn't really afford to sort of give that up at the time, so I thought I'll work part-time, study part-time, and honestly it was the best thing that I decided to do, because I think particularly with the MA in literature, as I'm sure you know most MAs, but obviously I'm talking from my own experience, as with most MAs, you know, the reading lists can be quite extensive, and I knew that it was sort of going to be a book a week situation plus lots of secondary reading, so I wanted to give myself a little bit more breathing space, and it honestly turned out to be the best thing. So despite hoping to settle into 19th century studies, and you know really sort of aiming for that area of research, I surprised myself and fell in love with 20th century poetry, and I took a module titled Exchanging Letters, and it was sort of taught by this really passionate lecturer called Dr. Jonathan Ellis at the University of Sheffield, and he just opened my mind to poetry and letter writing, and I'd never really thought of letter writing in an academic context before, and studying it sort of alongside poetry was just amazing. We studied poets like Robert Lowell and Elizabeth Bishop and Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald, and sort of their love letters to one another, and Sylvia Plath. And it was just the best thing, and you know it was one of those modules that I just, throughout my whole MA across the 2 years, I just didn't stop thinking about it. So when I got to the end and it was time to write my dissertation, I knew that sort of that's where I needed to be. Most of my master's degree was kind of undisturbed, but towards the end it unfortunately overlapped with the pandemic, so I wrote my master's thesis in lockdown, and lovingly referred to it as the isolation dissertation. I spent my entire summer cooped up in my bedroom writing this thesis, and sort of just allowed myself to be in that world, and in the world of letter writing and poetry, and I ended up writing on the letters and poetry of Sylvia Plath, and the whole project was a complete labour of love. It was titled I Am More Myself in Letters, the Influence of Epistolary on Sylvia Plath's Art, Life and Poetry, and I even ended up publishing a chapter of it with an academic journal called eSharp, who are based at the University of Glasgow. I was really, really proud of that, because I just felt like all of my hard work sort of hadn't been for nothing. I know it's kind of not for nothing anyway, because you're getting your master's degree, but I just I was so proud of that project that I just wanted it to have sort of a separate other life afterwards, and that was sort of my way of doing that. But this process kind of introduced me to a different side of publishing as well. So unknowingly at the time, sort of I wasn't really thinking about jobs post master's degree at the time, but this sort of process of submitting to this journal introduced me to the editorial side of publishing, sort of to edit and go through that peer review process, and adhere to in-house referencing and different type styles and all of that kind of thing, and learning to take on feedback and criticism of a body of work that obviously I was really sort of in love with and really attached to, was such a learning curve for me, and really one of those experiences that I am glad that I did. It was a lot of hard work, because I'm sure, Liz, as you know, like being an academic yourself, submitting for peer review is just can be a nightmare at times, especially with the toing and froing process, but I really loved it, and I think it also helped me to understand more about the editorial process, and when I started weighing up what kind of publishing role I wanted to work in, it allowed me to sort of know instinctively what what it was that I wanted to do, and ultimately decided that editorial wasn't the one for me and pursued something in marketing instead. That being said, when it comes to getting into publishing, I didn't always know that I wanted to work in publishing. I had a couple of friends that had sort of gone on to work in publishing, and there was a girl that I met at university who was a couple of years older than me, and we became firm friends. And at the time, she was working at HarperCollins in London in their One More Chapter division, and I sort of kept loosely in touch with her and sort of kept tabs on what she was up to, and she eventually moved on to Boldwood Books, but more on that later. I didn't always know I wanted to work in publishing, but I set up a Bookstagram account during lockdown to document my reading for something to do more than anything. I loved reading. I'm a voracious reader. I'll read anything and everything that anyone wants to put in front of me, but I really enjoyed being part of that reader community. So this kind of eventually manifested itself into like an interest in publishing, and I was looking, when you go into a bookshelf, and I was looking at, the little logo on the spines and like seeing who was publishing it and opening the front of the book and which publisher was responsible for this next bestseller. And I sort of also really enjoyed the creative side of Bookstagram. So I was making flat lays for my Instagram and reels, and keeping tabs on trends and trending audios on reels, and like trying to figure out like what it was that made a reel go viral, that kind of thing. Looking at post analytics, how much reach my post had got, all of that stuff that is sort of really fundamental to my job now. I was just doing without even realizing that I was doing it. So sort of off of the back of that, I decided to look at marketing jobs in publishing. I applied for so many publishing jobs, and unfortunately didn't get a single interview. It's such a competitive industry, as we all know, and I knew that I needed some experience, but because I'd graduated technically from university in 2020, right into the pandemic, it was just something that was so difficult to find, and I knew that sort of for the time being it wasn't something that was in my short-term plan. Like I mentioned, I had a friend at university who ended up working for Boldwood Books, and at the time they were a really young publisher, brand new pretty much. They were founded 4 years ago, and I thought I would try my chances, and sort of wanted to try and get get an internship, but wasn't really sure how, and I thought it would be better to try an independent company than to try with someone like Penguin, because they get so many applications, and obviously at the time in the pandemic I just wasn't really sure what was happening with that kind of program. So I reached out to my friend who was the marketing manager there, and sort of just said, have you got an email address for your manager? I just want to reach out. And she said, yeah, sure. She sent me the email address, and I emailed with my CV just on a complete shot in the dark. And I asked if there were any opportunities to join the team as an intern. I should mention that I was looking for sort of unpaid work, which unfortunately I feel like the publishing industry has got a long way to go with paid internships. I am pleased to say that I was initially unpaid on my internship, but it did turn into a paid internship, which is really positive. But obviously this isn't the case, across the board. And I wish that it was. But I was really, really lucky, and there was an opportunity for a sales and marketing intern at Boldwood Books, and the position was also completely remote. So one thing about Boldwood Books is that the whole company is remote working. So we're all spread across the country. We've got team members in Edinburgh, we've got team members all the way down in Cornwall. So we're really, really spread out. So it was honestly the perfect time, and I had a phone call with the sales and marketing director, Nia Bainan, who I now work with, and quickly came on board as their new sales and marketing intern, initially for 3 weeks, but that was quickly extended to 6 weeks, and then I was there for around 5 months in the end, as their intern. I learned so much while I was there. Honestly, it was such a learning curve. I think the experience gave me such a foundational knowledge of the industry and sort of what a book marketer actually does, because I think going into it I was like, I think I want this job, but like I think I want to do this, but I don't really know what is required of someone that works in marketing and publishing. and I did all sorts of things, from like basic admin, like ordering drinks for, you know, Zoom parties, to optimizing Boldwood's Amazon A+ content, to, you know, learning about metadata and how we sort of rank things on Amazon and that kind of thing. It was honestly fantastic. I'm under no illusion that this work experience sort of was the reason that I was able to secure my next publishing position. I sort of, towards the end of my internship, a job actually became vacant at Boldwood, and I sort of applied for it, and I went through the whole interview process, which was quite lengthy. I had a first interview, and then I also had a second interview, which required me to do both a sales task and a marketing task. One of the sales tasks was something to do with like external partners, so it was like looking at sales reports from like Kobo and Apple and places like that. And then the marketing portion of it was I had to put together a marketing campaign for an upcoming book. So I had to make some assets like graphics for social, and think about sort of how I would market that book to an audience, what sort of hooks I would pull out, that kind of thing. Ultimately, I didn't get the job, unfortunately. There was lots of candidates, and at the time I just wasn't as qualified as quite a lot of the people that had applied for it. But I am a great believer that everything happens for a reason. And at the time I was absolutely gutted, but I think it meant that everything worked out in the best way. So my next step after that was I left Boldwood and I applied for a job as marketing assistant at a company called Joffy Books. They are an independent commercial crime fiction publisher, not so much crime fiction anymore. I think they've sort of started to dabble in all sorts of things now, and are publishing a lot of romance. But I applied there, had an interview, and I actually got the job. So I became their new marketing assistant on their brand new marketing team. So they sort of hired a big marketing team all together. So we're all brand new, marketing manager, social media manager, and myself, marketing assistant, and we all sort of joined at the same time. And this was kind of perfect for me because it was a hybrid position. So it was 2 days in the office in Shoreditch, and then 3 days working from home. It was a great learning curve for me. It was completely different. It was completely different from Boldwood, should I say. My time at Joffy was great, and I really, really loved it. I was responsible for lots and lots of things, but mostly sort of digital advertising, which was something really, really new to me. So getting my head around like the Facebook algorithm and cost per click and all sorts of different things like that, and trying to figure out sort of and learn, you know, more about digital advertising was a big learning curve for me. I wrote lots of newsletters, and I was submitting books for promotions, you know, all of which were sort of brand new to me. I also got to work on a thriving crime and thriller list, marketing multiple crime fiction bestsellers, but I established a big love of crime fiction while I was there, which is something that sort of I've taken with me on my journey now through publishing. I left Joffy not long after joining, actually. So I worked for Joffy Books for around 4 months, and Boldwood Books approached me once again, and they offered me a job as their marketing executive. They had they were expanding the marketing team, and they were growing, and they wondered if I wanted to come back. And I loved my time there so much, and really sort of felt passionate about their sort of ethos. They're sort of they're multi-format publisher. So the way that the company is set up is that it's sort of, we publish the ebook, the paperback, the hardback, you know, all of the audiobook, all of that happens all on the same day. So with a lot of traditional publishing houses, you'll find that like the hardback will come out on one day, and then sort of the paperback will come out a year later, and the audiobook, you know, like a little bit later on. And we don't really do that. The whole sort of cheesy slogan is publishing reimagined, and I really do believe that that is what we do. You know, we've got a very different model, and our main sort of USP is, you know, great author care, and, you know, we're sort of renowned for really looking after our authors. And I just really believed in that. And it was sort of a young, thriving company. They just won Independent Publisher of the Year at the Romantic Novelist Association Awards. And I just thought, you know what, I think this is where it's at. You know, when you just get a gut feeling. And I thought, this is where it's at. This company's going places. So I decided to jump ship and took the promotion and moved on. And yeah, it was just great. So since joining Boldwood, we've doubled the team. So we're now 4 marketers, and to match with sort of our rapidly growing list of authors and books, you know, we've got an extensive list of books, and you know, the books that we're publishing just grows every year, which is phenomenal. My main responsibilities at Boldwood are lots of things, but mostly sort of overseeing marketing campaigns for over 35 authors. So each of which has sort of bespoke tailored marketing from me. So that includes sort of attending marketing meetings where we discuss sort of next steps, previous books. It's time sort of to check in with the author and make sure all's well. I make assets and creative, writing copy, assisting with PR queries, so like reaching out to festivals and that kind of thing, and you know, providing them with bookmarks and setting them up for book launches, that kind of thing. It's all very exciting. And I also oversee our marketing for all of our crime and thriller titles. So as I mentioned at Joffrey Books, I sort of got that taste of crime and thriller, and when I joined Boldwood, one of my main tasks is to oversee the crime and thriller titles. And I launched our tailored crime and thriller newsletter called The Murder List in 2022, which I'm really, really passionate about. And it's a place for me and the team to market all of our brilliant crime and thriller fiction. And yeah, so, you know, I get to do lots of creative newsletter marketing, which is something that I didn't get to do quite so much at in my previous role. So, you know, when you get like, you know, when you get those emails in your inbox that are like, your flight's delayed, and it makes you open it, like that is me putting those subject lines on emails, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. But obviously I also work on lots of admin tasks. So we have a really great internship program at Boldwood, one of which, you know, of course I've benefited from this, but I think since I finished my internship, we've sort of really honed that internship program. So I know there's a link to this which I've provided to York St John alumni, so the link you'll be able to find that somewhere, but if you want to apply for that, then we're always keen to have the applications, and it's kind of like a rolling application, so we'll just get in touch if there are any opportunities coming up. But yeah, I help to train our interns up. I work on all of our seasonal marketing campaigns such as Christmas and summer reading, as well as creating graphics for social media, scheduling posts, writing social copy. My job is vast, but I hope that gives you a flavour of some of the tasks that I get up to. But yeah, I think that's sort of like my foundation, and where I got to where I am. So I'll hand back over to you, Liz.
Oh, thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. And what an exciting time for you and for Boldwood Books. I keep thinking of questions I want to ask, but I'm going to start by asking the questions we ask everybody from an alumni perspective.
Sure.
So just in really general terms, what's the single best piece of advice you've been given by somebody during your career journey?
I feel like this is like a really tough one, because I think there's so many things that people have told me over the years that have really, really helped. But I think the one thing that sticks out to me is someone once said to me, if you can do everything on the job description, then you're applying for the wrong job. And in other words, it's absolutely fine to apply for a job that you don't have all the skills for yet. In my opinion, I think if you can do sort of 30 to 50% of that job spec, apply, because your willingness to learn will get you so far and may even lead to new opportunities. So I think that's sort of the one thing that sticks in my mind. Also, I guess, like, fake it till you make it, which I know is such a cliche, but I think as someone that isn't necessarily an overtly extroverted or confident person necessarily, I think sometimes a lot of the time in my career I have to kind of fake it till I make it, and just, you know, pretend that I know what I'm doing, which, you know, I am most of the time, but I think you have to sort of convince yourself of that a little bit. So, you know, just, you know, not everyone knows, not everyone's got everything together, you know, like it's all an illusion. And I think you do just have to, like, have confidence in yourself and, you know, do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway, basically, would be my advice. So I hope that.
Thank you so much. No, that's so true, isn't it? And really good to hear it articulated like that. I think any new job is that steep learning curve, isn't it? So there will always be things you need to learn when you get there. Really
Yeah.
good advice. Also, I should thank Amy McCarthy for these questions, because she put in a huge amount of work preparing us for this session. So thank you to Amy for these questions. And the next question is, what was the most relevant module or course that you did at York St John that helped you develop these skills? And I think you touched on some of this, didn't you?
Yeah, I think definitely my dissertation module. I
Mm.
think like learning to be an independent researcher and to complete that project on my own, obviously with the help of a supervisor, taught me so much. I think it's just sort of those skills of time management and, you know, just working to a deadline that, you know, just lifelong skills and totally transferable. So yeah, definitely that module. Yeah.
Yeah, great to hear that. Yes, there are always deadlines in life, aren't there? And what is your favourite memory of York St John University?
Oh, why is there too many to pick? I love my seminars. I was that sort of like nerdy student that was always on time and was always at every seminar, and I loved them. I was taking, especially in my third year, I was taking modules I was really interested in. I also loved Archie's Day. Like, which student doesn't love Archie's Day? And I was also in the prospectus at one point, so I remember having a day. Well, sort of like a morning walking around campus with this photographer like snapping pictures of not just me but like a group of us, and I was eventually on the back of a bus in York. So would just be like this like billboard, and it was like York St John open day, and then it was like a picture of me on the back of this bus, and you know, which was generally just quite funny to both like myself and my friends at uni, and if my parents were like around in York, they would be like, she's on the bus, so that was quite like a fun memory, but yeah, honestly I loved it all. I don't really think there was anything that I could like pinpoint and say like that was the one thing, but yeah, I loved the whole thing.
Sure, they're fantastic anecdotes. I like that, the bus. So what do you wish you could say to your younger self when perhaps when they were just starting at university?
I think like don't be afraid of everything. Like I think I was afraid of a lot of things, and not even necessarily in sort of a negative way. I think I just lacked a lot of confidence to sort of, you know, do things. And I wish that I hadn't been that way, because there really wasn't anything to be afraid of. And you know, I wish I had more faith in myself, and you know, that it would all turn out all right in the end. I was sort of that student that would go to office hours and think that my essay was a bit rubbish, and I can see now how infuriating that must have been for my lecturers. But I think I just wish that I'd stopped worrying about whether I was going to get a 2-1 or a first, and just enjoyed university life more, and stopped putting that pressure on myself, because I think even towards the end it was like, you know, that sort of will I get a 2-1 or a first was kind of replaced with, am I capable of doing a master's? And the answer to all of those questions is always yes, because you can do everything, anything that you put your mind to. And I wish that I'd sort of instilled that in myself sooner, because like I can do it and I have done it. And you know, that would be my one thing. If I could go back, I would really shake myself and just say like, just stop. Like you're like, it's going to be fine and you can get there. So yeah, that would be my main advice. And I know it's easier said than done, but it really does always turn out for the best. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, wise words there. So moving on now to some career-based questions. And this is something I've been working on with this year's cohort of publishing students. We're talking about how to identify the skills that you already have. So what skills does a graduate need to emphasize for a career in publishing?
so I think it's just, you know, the main thing I would say, I'm going to talk sort of generally about my role, but like I think some of these apply generally. So the first thing that I would say is definitely time management and organization. So I think this applies to any publishing role, like regardless. I think getting yourself organized and being able to manage your time well is such an important skill, because I don't think you're ever going to not need that. But particularly sort of pertaining to my role, social media never switches off, and therefore it sometimes feels like you can't switch off either. So managing your time effectively so you're able to have a good work-life balance is so important. And work-life balance is something that I think is quite a topical conversation in publishing, because it's one of those industries that I think struggles with work-life balance sometimes. And while I feel like I've cracked the code personally, I know that it's not always the case, and it definitely depends on the company that you work for. So I would say definitely that, just that you're able to have a good work-life balance. Another thing, like sort of more marketing side, design skills and attention to detail, they're kind of the foundation of lots of my role, whether that's creating assets or Facebook ads or designing bookmarks, whatever. These are skills that I've had to really hone over time. And then the last thing I would say is like imagination. So I think this kind of works both for my role and also if you're working sort of in editorial, creative thinking, particularly for me, thinking about seasonal campaigns for Christmas, and summer, and all of those different things, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, and the ability to sort of come up with fun new concepts. And I guess that kind of pertains to editorial as well. But creative newsletter marketing and subject lines and all that stuff, the creative ones always do the best. So just being able to be imaginative and think outside the box. So those would be my sort of top 3 skills that I use a lot.
Oh, really helpful. Thank you. Marketing is so creative, isn't it? And you've spoken a lot about your passion for marketing, but do you have something that you love in particular, or a favorite aspect of the role?
Honestly, I think working with authors, I really, really love working with my authors, and they're really creative and they're really interesting, and they've always got these kind of fun anecdotes that sort of have inspired their books. So I don't think I'll ever get tired of hearing that. Every time I go to a marketing meeting, I'm kind of blown away by what they do. It's really cool. But I also have a cracking team. Like I really, really work with an amazing, experienced group of people that just, constantly encourage me to do better and be my best self. So yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah.
And I've been working with our Publishing MA students who are applying for their first jobs in publishing. So for somebody who's at that point, what advice would you give them?
Oh, so much advice. So many things that I wish that I knew. So the first thing that I would say, which is actually something that I just didn't even think about, don't just look at the big publishing houses like HarperCollins and Penguin Random House. Cast your net a little bit wider. Look at smaller independent publishers advertising vacancies, or even just reach out to them like I did and just see, have you got any work experience? The thing is with like larger publishing houses, while of course you've got the clout that comes with working for HarperCollins or Penguin Random House, the hiring process is often done a little bit differently. So it's often via a computer system rather than by a person. So a computer system often will filter CVs, which means that sometimes people that could be perfect for the role can be overlooked just because the computer system's not filtered it correctly. And yeah, so I would definitely, reach out, think about, smaller independent companies, because they're not to be overlooked. And honestly, I think they're going places. And I think it's, yeah. So that would be my first tip. The second one I would say is just to keep up with industry news as much as you can. So the Bookseller, Book Brunch, the Publishing Post, they're all great for this. The Publishing Post in particular, I know is often spoken about on publishing MAs. But I used them a lot when I was a publishing hopeful, and I used to keep up with it all the time because they often advertise jobs in there as well, which is also really useful. So it's a good way to sort of keep up with what's going on. The third thing I would say is when you're sent, this is probably one of the most important things. So if you take anything away from what I'm about to say, it is this: when you send a CV or cover letter, always address it to the hiring manager and tailor it to the company and job that you're applying for. So we see so many applications that come in that are just clearly copy and pasted CV and cover letters. And unfortunately, that does mean that it's discarded, because we don't really, if you haven't gone to the effort to sort of tailor it to the job, most companies aren't really going to give it a second glance because they see so many of them. So, you know, do something that's going to make you stand out. If you're not sure who the hiring manager is, look it up on their website. Reach out on LinkedIn to the hiring manager or the recruiter if it's via a recruitment agency. You know, do your research, and Google is truly your best friend. Don't just put dear sir / madam unless you really have no other option. That is the one thing I will say, because I know that my manager's been hiring recently, and she had so many sort of CVs and cover letters come through that were just dear sir or madam, and she's like, you know, I've got my name on the website, like I am the head of marketing, like it's really just a case of just not doing your due diligence and not checking that out. So I would say that is one of the main things that will lead to a job rejection. So make sure that you're doing that. The next thing I would say is don't rule out a certain job role. So editorial and marketing are the most applied for roles, but I think people forget that there's so many other jobs that you can do within publishing that are also really interesting. So like production, who obviously make all of the books. You've got cover designers if you're sort of more creative, rights and sales, among many other things. They're all really important publishing roles. So don't rule anything out. And don't just sort of apply for, you know, the thing that you think you want to do. You know, put some feelers out and see if you can get some work experience in other areas. And then the last thing I would say is when you're, you know, interviewing or doing a CV or a cover letter, show, don't tell. So show hiring managers why you're the perfect candidate for the job. Don't just tell them. So if you're saying on your CV, for example, oh, I'm really passionate about books, or I really love reading, show them, like, why are you passionate about books? Have you got a Bookstagram? Have you got a YouTube channel? Do you make content on BookTok? Like all of those different things, anything, you know, that you can do to show that you're really passionate about it and you've got an awareness of the industry is invaluable. And those would be my like 5 top tips. I'm aware that's like not one top tip, but those are my 5, and I felt like I had to get those in.
I'm so glad you did. Fantastic advice. Thank you. So that leads on to my next question, was going to be about the use of social media for people who want to get into publishing. And your story was great, you know, hearing about how you did the blog when you were at York St John, and then you had your Bookstagram account. So, you know, would you recommend that as a route?
Yeah, I would. I think particularly if you're applying for more creative publishing roles, like marketing. I mean, it goes, you know, it's a good way to show that you're engaged with the industry and you're engaged with books, regardless of which role you're applying for. But I think it shows you're passionate about the industry. You've got a good knowledge of genre, which is obviously really important. I think particularly in commercial fiction, like I work in, you know, having that awareness of like a rom-com versus you know, uplit and romantic fiction and women's fiction, like all of those things can sometimes amalgamate into one, and sort of knowing tropes and that kind of thing, especially with romance fiction and crime fiction, you know, I think it allows you to sort of gain that commercial awareness, and keeping up with BookTok and Bookstagram trends can be really useful talking point at interview as well. So, you know, if you've spotted something on BookTok, for example, you know, obviously we've had, you know, the Colleen Hoover explode recently, and if you've, you know, spotted something like that coming up, you can say, oh, well, I've noticed that, you know, Colleen Hoover has just started to explode, and I think this might be the reason why, or this is the kind of content that I would make if we were doing something like that to make one of our books explode, you know, that kind of thing. It's just a really good talking point. Also, just sort of anecdotally, we recently hired a new member of our marketing team, and she had a really big BookTok and Bookstagram presence, and I would honestly, obviously it wasn't the whole reason that she was hired, but I would honestly go as far to say that it was one of the main reasons that we wanted to interview her and ended up hiring her eventually, because she had such a great awareness of the BookTok platform just as BookTok was starting to take off. So, you know, when publishers were starting to take note of BookTok and what was actually going on TikTok and what readers were actually looking at, she was sort of right place, right time, and had the experience and knowledge. So yeah, I would definitely say it's worth doing. If that's, you know, what takes your fancy, then definitely worth doing, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's something to talk about as well. So yeah, definitely useful.
And for you, it sounded like that was really your way in. You were already acting like a, a marketing executive before you were by managing your own account and doing the analytics.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
my next question is around kind of how to build that network. And actually, you and I both have quite a similar story about how we got into publishing through somebody that we knew and then getting an internship. So, perhaps it's somebody out there who doesn't yet have a network. What advice would you have on building those networks?
Yeah. The thing is with publishing is that I'm really aware that like nepotism is a thing, and it really does break my heart because I wish that it wasn't like that. And for context, like, I had a really normal upbringing. Like I, had, until I met that friend at university, like I didn't even know publishing existed. Like it, obviously I knew the books were published, but I didn't really have any awareness of the industry as a whole. So it really was kind of one of those sort of building my own knowledge from the ground up. And on that sort of things before I'd got my internship, I would say that the things that I looked at the most were sort of the Society of Young Publishers. They're a really great place to start, and they are they do have like memberships which you can pay for, obviously, if you're capable, but I don't have a membership. But they also host lots of events nationwide, which I don't think you have to pay for to go to. I could be wrong, but I don't think you do, and I definitely know that they do some free events. So that's something to look into if you're able to. And London Book Fair is also great. I would say London Book Fair can be very overwhelming for someone that like has no idea what they're doing, and going into it, it's like just an absolute maze. But what I will say with London Book Fair is that you can meet other publishing professionals there, and often like reach out beforehand to organise a coffee. Publishing folk are generally very friendly. And 9 times out of 10, they're happy to give you a helping hand with most things within reason, and if they've got time. I, for one, if anyone wanted to reach out and get a coffee at London Book Fair next year or whatever, if I was there, I'd be more than happy to do so. So I think just building up those small networks of people. I would also say like Instagram and Twitter are really good resources. If you find people on Twitter and Instagram that are working in publishing, which most people in publishing have Twitter and Instagram accounts, reach out to them. Like there's nothing, and LinkedIn as well, same with LinkedIn. Just reach out and just say, hi, like I'm looking at getting into publishing, like would you be happy to answer a few questions? Or even if small things that won't take up a lot of their time, even if you just want to ask like, how do I do this? Or they've got a question about something specific. Those would be sort of the places that I would start. But I am aware that it's sort of a bit of a minefield and it can be quite tricky to get into, but I hope that me doing this as well will be a good resource for your publishing students. So if they want to reach out to me, they're always more than welcome to. I'm happy to do that. So
thank you. That's so generous of you. And I think you probably will be hearing from some of them as a result.
Fine.
Thank you. My next question is, and you've touched on this before, how important is it to know which area of publishing that you want to get into before you start? And I really liked your advice earlier about, don't be wedded to one area, but be open. So, yeah, what would you say on that front?
I think it kind of depends on the company. So I know that like my experience is obviously for two small independent publishers. So but I know that with big corps, like HarperCollins and Penguin, it might be a bit easier to sort of switch departments. But my experience at the moment is that it's quite important to know. Lots of publishing houses don't have the ability to allow you to switch departments easily, especially smaller ones. So I'd recommend getting work experience in both areas if you're unsure, to help you decide. I know that's easier said than done, but honestly, I think that's the best way that you're going to decide. Or even if you can just talk to someone that's doing that job and get a feel for, if you can't get the work experience placement, talk to someone that's in editorial, talk to someone that's in sales, talk to someone that's in production, and just find out what their jobs entail, and if you think you could do that, or if that sounds up your street, just to get a sense. And it might sway your decision one way or another, but I think I think it is quite important, to be honest, because otherwise it's difficult trying to tailor CVs and trying to tailor your experience and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think quite important.
Great, thank you. So this is my last question. And what actions could current students take to enhance their CVs if they're thinking about going for a career in publishing?
Yeah. So I feel like I've touched on this a little bit, but work experience really was the key to the door for me. As I mentioned, I got nowhere with applying for jobs, and it could have just been like the way that the job market was at the time in the pandemic. But I was so unsuccessful. I didn't get a single interview until I did my internship with Boldwood. It really, really changed the game for me. Sadly, like I say, lots of internships were unpaid, but not all my Boldwood internship was paid. But aside from getting work experience, I'd just say, you know, cast your net a little bit wider and talk to people that are in publishing. You know, do as much networking as you can. And I know that it doesn't even necessarily have to be publishing sort of centric. I know there's so many brilliant Facebook groups nowadays for like young professionals that, you know, people can go into, and you can just network with people. And it doesn't necessarily even, I don't even think it matters so much about you know, the industry. It's just the networking and getting that experience of networking, because you never know who you're going to talk to as well, and that person could also work in publishing or know someone that's working in publishing. So having those sort of external connections is really valuable. But I'd say publishing centric, probably work experience, and, you know, connecting with people on LinkedIn, connecting with people on Twitter. And there's loads of brilliant publishing professionals on Twitter that just constantly tweet about publishing. So yeah, those would be my things, I think. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I think it's a tricky one.
Oh, but thank you so much. There's a wealth of advice that you've given us today. I really appreciate all of that. And the best thing is it's really, really up to date and fresh and relevant. So I know that our students are going to really appreciate it. So I think that's bringing us to the end now. So yeah, I just want to say thank you very much. I think we're going to share details for how people can find out more, those links that you mentioned. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email the alumni address. So yeah, thank you so much, Jenna. That was fantastic.